whether it's your cell phones, whether it's your laptops that are going out of the office, or it's just remote access that's coming in afterwards. So cybersecurity is how do we protect all of that, the network expansion that's happening, in addition to the key data that everyone is storing internal, whether it's personal health information, whether it's financial data, or any kind of IP, intellectual property. So the standards are set in which organizations practice safe security, and they need to be reviewed on a daily, on an ongoing basis, on an annual basis. So we're going to go over how to keep your data compliant, how to keep your data protected, and what can be affected. It's not only just your data, it's your exposure, it's liability, and it's also your reputation. So why do they choose you? So cybersecurity does not discriminate. Everyone hears the big, large, cybersecurity breaches, TJ Maxx, Target, Schnucks, Anthem, over the last couple of years. But 71% of cybersecurity happens in businesses under 100 employees. So it's just, they don't think of it in that realm. So whether it's ransomware, CryptoLocker, and be able to term it cybersecurity. Everybody hears it's got to be a massive breach, and then it's cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is how do you protect your data, how do you protect that information, and then how are you compliant in your industry to be able to handle that. So you're liable, whether it's your client's data or it's your own data or it's your reputation, from the standpoint of just the exposure it gets. If you lose a laptop and it wasn't encrypted and had financial data, well, people have your access. They have access to your financial, institutions, passwords, and things like that. If you have a breach and you're in a healthcare industry, you actually are bound by a business associates agreement, to where if you do not have the proper measures in place, you actually have to pay out disclosures, do PR releases, and a lot of things. So there's a lot of liability. So there's a lot more risk than everybody thinks. And I think one thing I want to say is everybody is becoming numb to cybersecurity. It's happening so much. People are like, oh yeah, there's Anthem had it. Oh yeah, they're going to offer me LifeLock. Oh yeah, these are things that are happening. It can cripple a business in minutes. It is. You don't hear about the smaller businesses that are crippled on an ongoing basis. Between lawsuits, between exposure, bad PR, the last thing that organizations would want is to put their data in a place they know is not secure, or do business with an organization that's not securing their data. So there's more risk than you think. The vendors, everybody understands the Target. It wasn't Target. Target owns the liability. It was the hack happened to the HVAC company who had remote access into the network. They went through the HVAC's access into the point of sale system. So it actually breached two vendors through that breach, and that's all of Target's, what I call, group of vendors that they have to secure and maintain and manage. So your clients have access, remote access to portals and other things, and they have passwords. So your clients are there. And then also just overall, it's not the employees intentionally, but the employees they're an area of liability, whether they expose you, they don't put information in encrypted fashion, but it's really, there's a lot more risk that we need to talk, kind of go over. So CryptoLocker, how many people here know what CryptoLocker is? So a handful. So everybody should know what CryptoLocker is. And every business owner should know and make sure they're protected from CryptoLocker. So CryptoLocker is a version of ransomware. And so they have these villages over in Eastern Europe that all they do is try to create CryptoLocker. And the whole economy over there is supported by CryptoLocker. So what happens is somebody gets an email and it looks like it's coming from American Express. An employee clicks on it. Next thing you know, whatever files they have on their machine are now encrypted. They cannot access them without a password. And then if that computer's connected to the network, it just keeps going out and infecting more files, so you have to catch it as quickly as possible. The best defense to CryptoLocker is a backup, because you pay them, they're going to ask for more ransom. You're pretty much held hostage until they have it, and about 30% of the time, the data is actually released. So your best defense is backups, and that's just a good overall defense as a whole from an individual standpoint and also from a corporation standpoint. So another instance of the worst fear in the world is we took over a client right after the FBI showed up to their doors, about a week later. So the FBI showed up to the door and said, "You've been hacked, and you are the source. You're actually targeting and performing basically CryptoLocker scans through there. They were using them as a pawn in the game, and the FBI would basically put equipment in, and they did not want them to stop it because they were trying to track it down and do those, basically catch them. But for 2 days, the FBI was in their office. So obviously, and what that was, it was the root cause of a development team, a software development team that did not change passwords. So commonly known issue is it was like password one was the password. So knowing that you have complex passwords, knowing that you're doing password policy and rotation is so key. So patient health data exposed via email or stolen laptop. There's a hospital here in town that has had 4 laptops taken. The doctors have out of their cars, and one was a nurse, that it's just stolen, and they didn't have it encrypted. So all laptops have to be encrypted. Any device that goes out, you have to be looking at your strategy on how you're protecting, whether it's a cell phone that has client information, whether it's a laptop that's going out, or a tablet. You got to make sure anything that's going out is encrypted and taken care of. And then the other nightmares that are going on right now is a combination of financial spam. So what they do is they take an email from you. They've basically got a virus on another computer that your email has been sent to. And what they do is take your signature line, your code, and then they change and spoof the line of where it's coming from and send another user an email saying, "Hey, please wire me some money." And it looks very credible. It looks very credible. And the latest spoofing is where they change the domaining. So they actually go register a domain name that is very similar to yours. And then they go into large corporations and ask the CFO or the controller to wire, it's an email from the president or the CEO to wire some monies. And so the goal and the protection is having very good internal checks and balances and control and basically going through training and communication before some of these happen, because some of them are not going to be picked up by the systems. The firewalls, intrusion detection, and the security systems, they're social engineering. They're working 2 email addresses against each other. So we're talking about some of the risks. So now we're going to talk about how we prevent some of these in the areas of concern. So you have your systems and your networks, and so that includes all your cloud providers too and your data centers. You have data protection, how you protect data on a nightly basis with backups, on a daily basis with remote encryption. You have your communication methods, which is email, which is your mobile phone, and they have hacked phone systems too. Mobile, BYOD, you're basically bring your own device. Your data is walking out the door all the time. Just everybody here has the company data on their phone right now. So how do we protect it? Your online presence, your websites, your portals, and then just overall your financial systems. So we start with physical. So physical is the most common thing when you think cybersecurity or you think security, you think, how do I keep my business safe? And it's door access. So if you have door access and you're using technology to secure the physical locations, you need to make sure that's protected and that's being managed correctly. You have the server rooms, and then you have your data centers. And so every data center has a registered users list and authorized users list that they handle that needs to be reviewed on an annual basis. There's employees that leave, that their account might get compromised, that people get in with. So you've got to be managing that, keys and passwords. So the digital is really around the external threats, using firewalls, using next generation devices, whether it's web filtering, intrusion detection systems, to handle against. So antivirus is still important, but it's one piece of the equation. Everybody used to think, okay, my firewall and my antivirus is everything I need, And now you've got 2 or 3 other devices that have to be really kind of at that point of entry to secure the organization. And if there's anything that needs dual access, what we call it as a demilitarized zone, a DMZ, you put that in if you need access from inside the network for speed. But if it has any kind of external process or external exposure, you want to make sure the network is designed with safety as number one of the data and the organization. So you have some things up there, the virus and malwares. You don't hear much about the viruses much. You hear a lot about malware. You hear a lot about ransomware, and there will be more viruses coming out in different areas, and they kind of pre-stage them. Windows XP, if you haven't rolled those off, they're building those for a massive attack, and that's they're just waiting for it to get long enough. It's been about a year, but there's still a lot of threats out there on XP code. And then same with 2003 servers. So file sharing. So everybody uses Dropbox and some things like that of convenience. They can also be a point of sharing, basically security holes. And so if you have access to it, there's 2 pieces to it. From a business owner standpoint, is your data can be easily downloaded to a personal computer, right? So the data can be walked out. But overall, file sharing, it's a lot easier. People aren't password protecting their Dropbox as much, and it's if I hack into one computer, I can get into anything that's shared from that standpoint. So phishing, smishing, and vishing. So phishing is very much where they're trying to get you social engineered. They're sending out these emails to get you to click on it. So one of the core things we're going to go into prevention is employee training. Smishing is mobile. So it's if I send a text to you on your cell phone, you click on that, well, now I have access to your cell phone. So those are the things you gotta, it's more about awareness and not clicking the things you shouldn't click. And vishing is voice. So if they call you at home and say, oh, I'm Microsoft, I'm here to help you. People have had that. And then you get a couple people on the phone and you're like, well, hey, move this. And that's really more targeted towards residential, but there still is some that's targeting at a what I'll call an accounting or a finance level. So keystroking and keylogging is something that the virus scan should be picking up, the malware should be picking up, but that's where a lot of, if you're hosting an online presence, if you're using clear text, and these are the things to ask your IT and your web developers, if they're using clear text, they're exposing passwords. When you hear some of these releases that are more Linux-based than Windows-based, a lot of that is around clear text, and it's at the firewall level. So 2 years ago, every firewall at Amazon had to be reprogrammed because they had a break in clear text. So remote access, this goes back to target. Who's accessing it? So it's good practice as a whole from your IT team and just overall from a management perspective. Who has access? What type of access do they have? And this is not just on from a security standpoint, this is internal permissions. And then what vendors and clients have access to your systems? And then how often are their passwords changed? Because most of it's just stale passwords because it's convenience. It's not from a standpoint of any kind of intentional harm. It's just convenience. So you gotta be rigorous in making sure the password policies are handled. So a denial of service attack is something similar. We saw Ferguson's website go down, and Anonymous is a hackers group. They just sent so much internet traffic to it, the server shut down. It couldn't respond. It couldn't handle those things. That used to happen a lot more prevalent, and right now it's much more targeted. You don't see it as much in corporations as much as more of a PR stunt than anything else. And then password protection, password policy. So even if you're not in a compliant industry, we recommend that at the very least is a 90-day password policy, and use a complex password policy to handle that. So internal threats, email, not knowing how your employees are emailing out information that you have and whether that information is sensitive, and have you trained them to send out via an encrypted? Do you have an encrypted method to send out? So the data brought into the environment. We work with a lot of companies, and one of the tests of social engineering is go to that bathroom and put that USB key in that has some ransomware or has some key logging strokes, and that user just grabs it and plugs it right into their computer and say, thank you, welcome to the network. And the hacker has everything they have. Wireless is the same way. If you have good password and codes there. Password protection, we touched on that a little bit. So employees, we're all human. So there's nothing there. There's going to be slips and failures, but it's, in my eyes, it's how you respond and how you report to it. So if you've trained your staff and say, it's okay if we make mistakes, but we gotta run to fixing them, and it's how we get back up, then you're going to solve the problem a lot quicker, and you're going to handle the exposure if there's an issue. But there will be error as a whole, whether it's back in the IT department or it's in the front line on somebody sending out sensitive information, just an email. And then just overall, the vandalism. You wouldn't think it happens, but you got to prepare for it. We've had IT folk, all right, so some IT folk that get upset with management and do some pretty malicious things internally, to the point where authorities are involved. So it's not abnormal. It's more of the personality. So your data protection. So at any point, if you have questions, you can raise your hand. I'll go further. I'm kind of trying to keep us on track on time, so I'm going through this pretty quick here. So exposure, the location of the data and the accessibility of the data. So knowing where your data is it in the cloud? Is it in your server room? How is it being backed up? Is what I call confidence. Knowing where your data is and what your threats and weaknesses are, and who has access to that data. Who has access to your network? Those are the questions that you should be asking your IT team to report to you on at least what I'd say a biannual basis, just so it's reviewed internally. Cloud solutions. This is one of the biggest gaps in the last 2 years, is everybody thinks they're outsourcing their liability to the cloud solution provider. The cloud solution provider is supposed to be managing it with you. They're providing the hardware, the bandwidth, the power, and a secure environment, but they're not taking on all the liability. And if the contract is with you and the client, the contract's with you, the client. It's your job to manage the vendor. It's your job to handle that. A lot of people think they're outsourcing the issue. They're outsourcing a lot of it. You're outsourcing infrastructure. You're outsourcing some of the cost, but you're not outsourcing the liability. So you're co-managing that. File sharing, just review. You'd be surprised when we go into organizations how many people don't know that half their employees have Dropbox on their computers or some kind of file tool, and it's not intentionally bad. What it is, it's intentionally for them to help them do their job remotely or kind of do that. A lot of people will email the file back and forth, but the intent is not bad. The problem is you're just furthering your exposure and your problem and your risk. So making sure that Dropbox and other file sharing is approved by role in the organization. So then you have FTP and SFTP, which is file transfer protocol. It's transferring large files and handling that. And so making sure you do secure FTP instead of not secure FTP and passwords from that standpoint. And then any industry or any organization that has compliance. You have, you're protected. You have HIPAA, compliance. You have a BAA with your vendors and even subcontractors. Have them, whoever's accessing that with regards to personal health information. The other areas in financial, making sure you'd be pretty, high-end financial. Everybody's fingerprinted on the IT team. It's standard practice. Background checks. This is one of the things, whether you're working in any compliance, is making sure there's background checks. And my recommendation is, even if you're not compliant, the IT team needs to have background checks. And the reason why is we're kind of the step below your attorney and your accountant in that area of you putting all your trust, the peace of mind that you sleep at night. You need to make sure you have the right individuals that are maintaining and protecting it. If you don't have confidence in them, they will disclose everything, they will keep you protected, and they'll bring forth that, then you've got some issues. We have one client we took over. They basically found out after they let go of the IT guy that the guy had a felony for hacking into a system because they didn't do a check. So there was no confidence, and potentially more risk at that point. So if you're compliant or not compliant, just background checks are huge for your IT staff, anybody who's really owning or managing and administrating that data. So we talked about data protection. BYOD is probably one of the hotter ones. There's apps that are out on phones. So the very minimum level is what I say is all phones have to have password policies on them if they're going to attach to corporate email. If they don't have password policies, they don't have access to corporate email. So that it's a moot point. If you're publishing apps, make sure there's good password policies, and you're reviewing that on an ongoing basis. A lot of times, what corporations do is they set something up, they put it in place in production, and then it just kind of maintains until they have a problem. And it's just another thing that has to be managed from a cyber, but just overall security measure that's going on an ongoing basis. Mobile, make sure anything that goes outside of your office is encrypted. There's free encryption software. There's managed encryption software that will handle all of this. Windows 10, Windows 8, and Windows 7 all have it. An enterprise version, not the retail version, all have encryption built in. It's called BitLocker, and it's built in, and you can use a fingerprint, but it's already the whole disk and the whole volume on the C drive and the D drive are encrypted. So look at areas like that when you're doing your upgrades to make sure encryption's part of the solution. And then, like I said, with CryptoLocker, it's backups, backups, backups. Retention of the backups, but the backups is what I always tell the IT teams is what keeps everybody in business. From a continuity standpoint, the best defense for CryptoLocker is your backup. There is actually what's coming out is probably a year or two out now. Is all phones will be encrypted. They'll have some layer of encryption built in. So the best policy is to use third-party apps like Zix has an app that where the data right now, if you, let's say you exited the organization, at that point, we have two choices from an IT standpoint, depending on what your email environment is we can actually push a command that will actually make your whole phone useless. We call it brick a phone, right? So, or we have the ability to work with you and remove the email and clear the cache. So the goal is to have an app that stores and has the email and the corporate information available that doesn't cache on the phone. So there's quite a few of them out there now that I'd recommend you look at from that standpoint. But every one of your phones, if you leave or it gets stolen, report it to your IT immediately. Hey, I had my phone stolen or I lost my phone. It's not anything bad. Just let us brick it. Let us, let us take care of the security piece. So a lot of the gaps that are in between the employee areas aren't intentional. It's just lack of communication and working together with the IT team and the HR team. We find that working with them, so quickly you can, and it's good or bad, you can quickly identify who is the user who clicked on the email because every file's with their name on it. So you can quickly go there, but it's get out. It's not only in email, but it's get feet on the street and go tell everybody, well, stop email, stop things. Let's get the state back. If you're working on anything right now, document what you're working on. So you might have to, basically redo the file or from that standpoint. But ideally, from the swiftness of it and the ability to unencrypt and not have to pay money, backups are the best answer.
If you ever went on a network, has to go back and redo it.
So depending on the exposure. So your IT will be able to tell exactly what files on your hard drive were encrypted, and this goes back to making sure everything is stored in a network drive as opposed to on your desktop, because we can protect and back up the network drives unless your organization's backing up desktops. Most of them don't. To making sure that you're using and saving them in that area. So it goes after your local hard drive first, and then it will try to go out to other folders. And then the IT team can go in and look at and see which folders were affected and only restore those folders instead of the whole area. So communication. So as we kind of go communication, email solutions, all email solutions have to have security. So you have not only are you preventing your organization to have spam, so you need to protect yourself and your reputation as an organization that can authorize and be able to send out secure emails and just general emails. Thank you. So, and just there's SSL certificates, so secured socket. It's basically web-based certificates that you put on websites and you put on your email servers that certify that this is a good known source that is sending communication. Encryption on email. So most organizations, what I would say is it's rather common in financial organizations that spend a ton of money on encryption, security, and other things. They're crippled because their users don't use it. They choose to send out that quick email to, whether it's a 401k, a census to their client, or their client sending it to them and they're not using it and they're just exposing it in both ways. So using passwords, using encrypted emails, it's one more step, and a lot of people just do not use it. We'll go into that in just a second. Making sure your web portals are secure, making sure they're maintained. A lot of people create them and then don't manage them. And then the same with FTP servers. So email stats, this might be a little hard to see, but over around 78% of employees ignore their corporation's policies around encrypting confidential documents. So 78%. So, and how frequently do they make the mistake? It's over 60% that they send it to outside of the organization. So whether it's internally or externally, they need to get in best habit. And so what that is the prevention method it's going back through, and a lot of these areas are just employee training. So, everybody does it once when the new hire comes in, but they don't do it ongoing. Is every year, everybody needs to go to an IT, security and best practices, internal, whether it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes and you're covering the same thing again. It's just, repeat, and repeat. So they do it. So the numbers are there. So remote access, like I said, the data's walking out your front door. Everybody's organization right now has data on their phone, whether it's confidential or compliant data is a different question, but data is cached on these devices. We kind of already touched on this. The remote access, the permissions, any apps that will access your data. So you might have cloud apps. You need to make sure that they are being protected, and the password policies and just the remote wipeability we talked about. The only thing I want to touch on here on the online presence, so social media. Social media is constantly being hacked. We don't see it as much on a corporation side. You see it more from a celebrity standpoint, saying bad things. But what it is, your reputation at hand. So if you outsource your social media and they're not doing password policies, you've outsourced your potential liability on your reputation. So it just takes one thing that's put on there that you might lose 2 customers on an offensive social media tweet or a post from that standpoint. So managing and making sure they have good best practices on password policies and handling that. Financial systems, I think this is where a lot of people are a lot more secure, is, you have password policies, whether you use QuickBooks or different ERPs, Great Plains, having that password policy in there, having those things, but who has access, who really needs access, and what level of access they need in there. Because it really goes down to the user. So if they hack into the one computer, they get on that user's machine and they get some key logging or keystroking, that's how they're going to get into your financial packages. So you want to make sure that they're changing their passwords, but you also want to limit who has access to different levels. So your internal and online systems, PCI compliance for those people who take and manage credit cards. The credit card industry has compliance. You need to be doing annual reviews of your compliance and the checklist to make sure that you have the secure measures and just where that credit card information is stored. And that's what a lot of the Schnooks and the Target and those things got handled. So again, everywhere I go, I always put backups and retention, because that's the what I call is the peace of mind and sleep at night. So why are we not protecting it? So if they said 70% of small businesses under 100, and then other organizations are getting hacked, why are not protecting? The large ones, the Targets and the rest of it, they're a lot harder to hack, right? So they got bigger teams. The small ones, they don't discriminate. They're just going at an IP address. Just like, I'm knocking on your front door of, 123 Mockingbird Lane. They're just, hey, are you open for business? Can I come on in? It's just as easy as that. So they're coming after us from that standpoint. So we first might not understand the layer of technology that needs to be there, or we don't want to understand it. We want to pay for somebody to manage it and to handle it. So this is why we have vendors do these things. Everyone from a business owner and in different roles in the organization have their priorities, their business goals, and this is usually the IT department. Cybersecurity is not just the IT department's responsibility. It's management team, it's HR with regards to policy. The three of them have to be working in conjunction. They have to be working in conjunction on resources, whether it's they get cell phones, anything that goes outside of the organization, from encryption on the laptops and those things. And then back to, I think people just don't think it'll happen to them, or we've become numb to it's going to happen. I'm going to have my identity stolen. We're going to get hacked. One of the retailers I go to, we get hacked. One of the businesses I do business with is going to get hacked. But that's a loss of a client, loss of a relationship, and lost revenue from a business standpoint. So the questions are asked: what systems do we have? Who manages the systems? How are they secure? Who manages the security? And when does it happen? Does it happen once and then it happens annually after that? There's things called penetration tests that you can, there's various vendors that you can handle. They can do an external penetration test where they try to hack in. One of the number one classes in college right now is called ethical hacking. So there's kids that are growing up that it's like a game to them, and the ethical hacking. And so doing penetration tests on an ongoing basis, at least annual at the minimum, and external, and then you can also do internal. And just testing the measures, then making sure that the backups are there. A lot of people, I always say, oh yeah, we got a good backup. I can give you the report. We got a good backup. A backup is worthless without a restore, because you don't know if you're backing up the wrong data, corrupt data, or just in essence that it's just not being, it can give you a false positive on success. So I always call it the backup and restore process when we talk. So making sure you're doing a restore process on a quarterly basis at a minimum is critical. How we manage information. So this goes back to policy. It goes back to management. It goes back to HR, then to IT. So if management doesn't value, protecting the information, then the IT team is going to not have as much to do, or really might not take it as seriously. So it's basically a combined approach between management, HR, and IT that really have to drive together, that this is important. The employees are going to be trained, and we safeguard our data for risk, but also for our clients and our reputation. So then you review who's accessing, how data is accessed, who manages data access. A lot of times organizations are kind of handcuffed by their IT person or their IT vendor, and they need 3 people in management all need to have all the major passwords that are out there. Or if somebody gets the proverbial hit by a bus, wins the lottery, or just doesn't show up that day, you need to have access, and you need to have that, and that needs to just be, hey, you know what, we're doing our audit. A lot of people do financial audits, they don't do the IT audit. The IT audit is just as important, so you have controls and access and management to that. And the organization and the IT team need to know this is just part of a process of keeping the business running and safe. So business cost and risk. If you do have a cybersecurity breach, the average cost for that 71% under 100 employees was $36,000. So that's cost of backups, that's cost of reporting it, that's cost of exposure, and lost data. So it varies depending on the size of the company or firm, to where it could be something smaller, but if you're a large retailer and you have a big e-commerce presence, it could be like Amazon, eBay. It could be several $million an hour of lost revenue if they're hacked, and then potentially what is the future if you lose that client ongoing and that trust. So to determine the value of data, answer the following, ask the following questions. What's the cost to repair an infected computer? $200. What's the cost for labor while the systems are down? So let's say it's a CryptoLocker. The whole office is down, 50 people. Whole office is down. It's not just somebody in there restoring the backups. It's everybody that's not able to get access to their computer, the data, their computers, or the communication pieces. What are the costs restoring on data on an hourly basis? So the IT cost is not as much as the productivity cost, but it can really add up from that standpoint. What are the cost disclosures? If you're in compliance, you might say, well, I disclosed that we had a breach on a password and there might have been issues. Well, if the covered entity actually from a HIPAA or a Personal Health Information Act would want you to disclose that, that's PR. That's going it could be tens of thousands quickly just in disclosures. And then in the end, what's the cost of your reputation, of your company's name on the front page of the local newspaper, on the front page of your industry magazine as the example of being hit on a cyber issue. And so there's a lot of organizations, there's a lot of people that, whether it's hacked, it's social, spoofing from that standpoint, there's a lot of business owners you don't hear. You hear the Anthems, you hear the Target, you hear the Schnucks. You don't hear, the media company that I know, he's a friend of mine in Boston, and not a client, but a friend, but $120,000. And they're still fighting it, and they can't get it back from the bank. Or you don't hear the CryptoLocker issue because they didn't have backups, and now they're a month behind, and they've got to recreate all those financials. So the cost and overall value is it's a lot more mounting. It's kind of like the ones we all just want to kind of put our security blanket over ourselves and say, all right, I'm going to sleep at night. You got to check these, and you got to, from a rigorous standpoint, just have a process that it's reviewed at least annually, if not biannually, and ongoing. So it won't happen to me. This is 2013. It went up, and I think the CNA guys have some more recent data. So it was up to 1.8 in 2014. It happened. So, and where the consequences, reputation and brand, to me, reputation means future business with your existing customers. So 29% was saying that was the most impactful. People didn't want to work with you after you have those issues. Lost productivity, lost revenue, paying forensics to get to the bottom of it, the IT support, and then the compliance regulation. So factors to consider. Go back to your HR team. Go back to the management team. Say, what are our policies for technology? What's our internet usage, our email policy? Look at your handbooks. Look at just how you manage your technical equipment. Is there an asset management program? Some of these things just kind of disappear sometimes. Making sure you're handling those, and then really around mobile, bring your own device. Making sure you have a policy and encryption there. So, solutions should cover all the compliance areas and mitigate risk. Backups on site, backups off site. A multi-layer approach to backups, and then having a validation method of restores and management getting those reports. A lot of times, management doesn't get those reports. They say, "Oh, that's IT's job," right? And and if the IT guys on your management team, which most of the time it's might or might not be, but probably it's reporting into the CFO. If it's not, it's the CIO. They need to be coming. The proof's in the pudding. Show us the numbers. Let's feel comfortable. Let me do a test, or let the CFO do the test. Make sure they get access to the things. Having a plan, having a cybersecurity incident plan. How are you going to react? The worst problem is most people aren't prepared to react. So it takes them twice as long and they fumble the process. So having a plan put in place. And just overall, gaps in training. A lot of it is training the employees on what to do, not to click, and because these systems they cannot catch everything. And if they did, they wouldn't be hacker. It'd be a lot better from that standpoint. But just communication and training in your business. So prevent. So just back to that kind of the biannual checklist is update your security. You've got your security software, antivirus, anti-malware, your security products, your firewall, your web filters, and the various intrusion detection software. That these next generation of firewalls produce a lot better reports, and they tell you by user or by malicious content what people are trying to do, and give you more information on what's actually happening. And it's eye-opening. It's eye-opening because you just don't see it. It's usually being stopped, but now you see what they're stopping. So investing in that front-end equipment is big. So that's the firewall and that. So going back and making sure your IT team is doing a password policy and rotation. A lot of the times, it's the HR process at the end. Are they terminating it and then they change the password once and then it just stays, and then the IT and HR, they don't clean up that user, and that user stays in there for 2 years with that same password, is goodbye or whatever, and then guess what? Hackers are in. They've got an old account and they're in because they haven't turned off remote access. They haven't changed the password. Realistically, that user probably has a 60-day, maybe a 90-day life cycle to where you need to basically disable it and take it out of there. But they can still, you see just not tight, rigorous process there that causes a lot of gaps. Having external audits and proactive penetration tests is a huge measure. If you're in compliance, you have to do it. You have to prove it if you're in financial, medical, and in those areas. Determine your IT's roles, access policies. This is kind of going back through, who should have it, and management should have some of these in a safe or anything else, but making sure that those are happening. And just education and training. I think a lot of people do that new hire education, tell you about HIPAA, tell you about this is how we do our passwords, this is how we do things, but they don't educate on an ongoing basis. You can tell it, proof on the encrypted emails. A lot of people don't know how, and they might have been told once in an email. That's not effective. They have to know, because you're putting one email could take that whole cybersecurity. It could be that whole $36,000 loss of that one email of exposure or anything from that standpoint. So what's next? Go meet with your management team, go meet with your IT team, meet with your HR team, and outline the concerns and risks and a plan to do that. And then just, what's the annual plan? What's the biannual plan? Have your IT department or your IT vendor or your IT individuals go through and do the same thing with their partners and their vendors, and make sure they're changing passwords and they're doing the things they need to do to keep, we call it hardening the environment, but keep the security tight. Perform an internal audit. Outline the critical datas and risk. So outlining your critical datas, this is as much a cyber as is a business continuity and a DR strategy, is what are the things we have to have, and then talk about whether they should be inside your organization, outside your organization. If you're outsourcing it to a cloud or a data center, make sure they have the security process there. So every IT or business decision needs to have the question is, how are they securing it? How are we managing them securing it, or how are we updating this? Identify the gaps and create a resolution plan. If it's off-site, off-premise, basically have them on an annual basis tell you what their security is and go through that. They all have to have it. Most of them are in data centers, and there's SAS 70 and SSAE 16. They're data center basically certifications that they have to go through, that they need that have good internal checks and balances. So look for those certifications in your providers. There's FBI.gov, just with more information. Conduct an external audit. I can't say enough. It's just train the team. Train your employees on what to do and what not to do, because just one slip and a click, and next thing you know, you've got a headache for the next 24 hours, or worse than that, you have a large exposure that you have that handle. And then it's kind of schedule the future. Repeat and figure out the gaps. Repeat, because it changes, and as your systems are upgraded, or the life cycle of systems, they're not always being maintained at a level, and each audit would show something different, because on a firewall there's a port that might be open, and today the port is accessible, and then it was not accessible prior to that report. So that doing those scans is very important. So here's some of my information. If you have a card, you can gladly just, I can send you a slide or any questions from that standpoint. So I'm going to open it up.
So we are the big bad insurance company. We have a 3-hour presentation for you. So we're going to lock the doors at the back. If you can just do that for us. No, just joking. We are CNA. I am Adam Smith. I'm the technology segment underwriter. So I kind of specialize in technology companies. So that's kind of my niche. I only insure technology companies for property casualty and for tech E&O and cyber and privacy. So that's kind of my niche. Ken's more of a generalist. He does kind of miscellaneous E&O for non-tech companies. So between us, we kind of cover most industries out there. That's just a disclaimer. We can go on here. So Ryan did cover a lot of stuff. There might be a little bit of overlap, but we're going to get past that. We're going to go through this so we can get you out of here. But we just wanted you to sort of see what we're seeing in the industry, what coverages are out there. We obviously work with Crane and other agencies in St. Louis and Kansas City. And, cyber risk is one of the biggest things out there at the moment in the insurance industry. And it's the one we get, the most questions about. No longer is it about property or GL or workers' comp or auto. It's all about how can we cover cyber? How can we cover our credit cards? How can we cover our information on our systems and stuff? So we're just going to kind of go through that a little bit and keep it high level. We're not going to go into the weeds too much. So, but if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. No problems. Hopefully we can answer them. But we'll go on a little bit there. So yeah, understanding cyber risk. So we've done a little bit with Ryan, but this is one of my favorite slides. This kind of shows us the world we live in right now. We've got the cloud. Everybody's heard about the cloud, which is basically just data centers with all your information on it. That's what the cloud is. So nothing's on your computers or your networks anymore. It's all remote somewhere in a mountain usually. We've got mobile, so what we call this is the mobile, the Internet of Things, sorry. So not just your computer anymore, not just your cell phone, but your fridge, your car, anything, you're going to have a watch now. Everything's going to be kind of interconnected, and so we have to be able to manage that and understand that and see what the risk is around that. But it's just going to balloon in the next kind of few years. Obviously, we talk about social media, and we're not just talking about people at home. We're talking about businesses and their own social media. So their own Twitter account, their Facebook accounts, their Instagram, their LinkedIn. All those are kind of areas where we have to kind of assess that risk and how it's being managed and how are you managing it. And then we've got this kind of thing to the left there, big data analytics. That's kind of the next thing that's coming in the mobile world, in the kind of IT world. So it's a good example would be hospitals taking in millions of records about cancer patients and trying to kind of group that all together and to see if there's any patterns and how can we maybe diagnose that better. But it's like you have this huge amount of data, and then how do you kind of crack the nut, as it were, to sort of see some kind of patterns and things like that. So that's the next thing that's coming out, and you'll there'll be more talk about that as businesses like yourselves get into big data analytics, using your own data or taking other people's data to try and get a competitive edge. So I think Ryan mentioned this, went over this. How do breaches occur? It's pretty obvious. We got the malicious code, denial of service. Obviously, hackers going in there, malicious hardware, obviously physical theft, and then the internal stuff, accidental release, your laptop got stolen, and one of the big ones at the moment is obviously rogue employees. So disgruntled employees doing some bad stuff. But one good thing is that policies now and cyber policies do cover rogue employees. They didn't used to maybe 5 years ago, but now we know that's a big area of concern. So rogue employees doing bad things with your data is covered now. So this is kind of like, where are the liabilities? So what we call is, we have tech E&O, which is basically covering your contract with a vendor saying we're going to do X, Y, Z on your systems. So for example, Ryan's company, we would cover Ryan's company, and Ryan would say, I'm gonna help Crane out. I'm gonna make them secure. So I would cover his tech E&O, his contract with Crane, saying I'm gonna do X, Y, Z, and we would cover him to failure to perform, failure to deliver. So that's the tech E&O side. Then you kind of have the privacy injury liability, which is unauthorized disclosure of sensitive or non-public private information. So And that's kind of where cyber comes into it. And then obviously Ryan's saying, hey, I'm going to protect Crane's system. So that's where the network security liability is. And so he's going to make sure that there's no transmission of viruses, that there's, people can't access it because he left a hole in it or something like that. So we're going to cover that. And that's all called third-party coverage. And then we have the true cyber, what you guys kind of think about around, cyber is the first-party risk. It's your own information, it's your own data. It's loss of business income, it's electronic theft, it's extortion, things we kind of talked about in Ryan's presentation. But that's what true cyber is. It's you've got all this data, you've got all this sensitive information, you want to protect it, and we're going to give you a policy to help you protect it in case something does happen down the road. I want to jump in there.
Going back a slide, Molly. One bullet point that's not there that I like to talk about is, I call it collateral damage. If you're a business owner and you get back to your desk today and your network is corrupted, immediately what is the cost for you to interrupt your day, to find a law firm that can represent you, or to find credit monitoring services for those customers, or to find a call center, to hire a PR team. Those are some of the, I call them, again, collateral damage costs to the business owner.
All
right. This is more of the kind of overview of the protected health information. Ryan talked about the HIPAA and the business associate agreement. So social service, healthcare especially, have the PHI sensitivity. The personally identifiable information, you'll see the list there. And then towards the bottom, the confidential information. A lot of the businesses that I handle are white-collar law firms, accounting firms, and they're really sensitive to the confidential information that they may hold about their clients, trade secrets, intellectual property. Law firms handling merger acquisition and patent type work. Those are the third-party corporate client information that for the businesses that I handle the white-collar, healthcare, manufacturing, construction. The buyers now are really starting to be sensitive to that exposure.
So yeah, common reasons for E&O incidents for tech companies. So why will a claim come in necessarily? So it's going to be a misunderstanding between the buyer and the seller. You said you were going to do this, and you actually did this. Therefore, we've had some kind of consequential financial loss, and we're going to sue you. Unrealistic specs or changes. Acceptance of customer risk through hold harmless agreements. So we're always going to be looking at the contracts that you will have with your vendors, just to make sure that it's that it's in your favor, not in the other person's favor. Other reasons that we that we get claims are obviously delays in project completion. Security errors, unusable recommendations by vendors, things like that. Sometimes we'll get into a project and we'll find out there's incompatible hardware and software. We didn't, there wasn't, a proper spec done. So these are all the reasons why a technology company could be sued when they're doing some work for another company. So some kind of intellectual property considerations for software developers, which is kind of my world. Technology, so we'll cover software copyright infringement, but we don't cover patent infringement. That's it's too difficult to cover. It's all about he said, she said. You'll get countersuit. So we never cover patent in case you think patent will be covered. But we do cover copyright. So the direct copying of some or all of a particular version of a given piece of software. So a tech company has this new piece of software, but another company says, well, actually you've copied our code completely. So we would cover that. And then there's privacy, for software service vulnerability that leads to a breach of a customer, things like that. So that's what when I cover a software developer, that's they want to cover their intellectual property. So this is a bit of a busy slide, and it's kind of interesting, but it kind of just shows you, where liability or which policy would respond to it and stuff. And you can see the, when you have a business customer going to the consumer, you can kind of see where the GL comes into play. But then there's areas where the GL won't cover you. Your normal kind of BOP policy won't cover you for certain things. Claims for damages of indemnification, limitation of liability. So that's where the tech E&O comes in. I don't want to get too into it and stuff, and you can obviously talk to your agent about it, and I always come out with agents and talk to customers about their coverages and what they need and stuff. If you want to go to the next one, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. This is represents one of the segments that probably is the most active buyer, at least on my desk right now, and that's the healthcare setting. Listed out a couple of common claims examples. A represents the illustration of a third party relying on your network to conduct business. In this case, it was physicians who relied on the network to access patient records. And the claim scenario is the network is down, so the physician can't access the record and then can't treat a patient, and their revenue is down. Healthcare benefits companies, as another example, fraudulently may pay claims. Regulatory, our largest, at least in my world, the largest claim we paid on a cyber incident came from a regulatory action. And I think the story was that it was a state attorney general who had aspirations to be the next governor. So the sense in that story is that the regulatory is a very real exposure for you if you release patient records or protected health information, or the PII. Some of the first-party claims examples, we've talked about this, Ryan talked about this, the event expense, notification, credit monitoring, public relations, call center forensics. Those are all provisions in the CNA policy. Extortion, think kidnap and ransom, and the network data restoration. And I would add, maybe as related to the healthcare segment, is the whole nonprofit segment. Museums, libraries, foundations, if any of those are represented here, you've got donor data that you must protect. Another common industry that occupies my desk, we're starting to see this particular segment have clients that require cyber coverage. High-profile either corporate clients or high-profile personal clients of law firms or accounting firms, realtors who manage apartment buildings that have tenant information, background checks, credit information on tenants. All of that is represented on this slide as third-party claims. And then D is a consultant. I also handle kind of that business-to-business consultant, ad agencies, graphic designers, and they're now very sensitive, and their clients are requiring. Had an ad agency out of Indiana that was starting to design the next brochure for one of the big box hardware companies that was starting to now offer a line of paint that had before never been in their store. So it was pretty secretive. Some corporate information that they were working on, didn't want to get released. Gives you a sense of how that corporate info makes its way into the third-party exposure. And then the last one that I handle pretty typically, manufacturing, construction. Certainly less exposure in this segment because they're not handling medical records outside of their employees. Not a whole lot of corporate info, but A and B and C represent some of the common claim scenarios, especially A, drawings, plans, blueprints, permits. All of that could reside on your network. It gets corrupted, and then your client has an expense to recreate that.
So, I mean, where things come into play a lot is obviously with the state, and the state's going to have its own notification laws. Each one has, different costs associated with it, different provisions around it, like, time, how often do you have to, how quickly do you have to inform your customers, how much data was encrypted. Fines can be different in every state. So if you're working in, maybe a tri-state area, you have to know about the different jurisdictions and the different breach notification laws there. But typically, tech and cyber policies are going to help you with that. There's going to be a sublimit associated with those, and so when you do have a claim, the policy would respond to that, and insurance claims managers would understand how those laws work and would help you to respond to those. So yeah, managing cyber risk. So as I think Ryan mentioned, 96% of breaches were avoidable through simple or intermediate controls. This is an interesting one. The per record cost of data breach has lowered, suggesting that companies are investing more resources in prevention and detection. They have lowered, but that's because a kind of per record cost. Companies now have more records. So, before it was maybe they just had 100, and maybe they had to pay $100 per record. But now they're having kind of tens of thousands, and so that kind of per record cost does come down to in the cents and stuff. But it's still ridiculously expensive, time-consuming. There's a business income risk associated with that, as CEOs and owners of companies have to spend their resources and their time kind of figuring this all out. Again, a cyber policy will help you with that. It will help you with the notification. It will help you with any cyber extortion. It will help you kind of go through the regulatory red tape and stuff. So again, the best way of doing it, the leadership of a company, has to take, ownership of this, figure out how the reporting works, what's the responsibility, what policies and procedures do they have in place, what's the legal ramifications, what does your state kind of have in place? Some states, obviously, worse than others in inverted commas. And as Ryan mentioned, you want to be, you want to have awareness and training. You want that to be, almost, ongoing on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. Some of the things we talked about was that PCI compliance. It's no good being PCI compliant today, because next month the PCI, body will come up with some new guidelines that you have to incorporate into your day-to-day business and stuff. So you always have to be up on the current technology and up on the on the latest things. So always doing security assessments, always monitoring it. Always look at your incident response and recovery planning. We kind of like, we prefer now not disaster recovery but disaster avoidance. Let's avoid the breach in the first place. And some obvious things. Protect your home networks. If you're an owner of a business and you like to go home and do some work in the evening, try and have some kind of VPN that's associated with your business and not just using the home network, because that can be easily breached. We talked about mobile devices. Maybe it's better to have two separate phones. One for the employee have two separate phones, one for his own personal use, and then a BlackBerry maybe. But just easy things. Turn off Wi-Fi that's not needed. Delete text messages. Don't press on anything that looks kind of like it didn't come from the CEO type thing. So. There's little acronyms here. DART, delay giving information. Don't just reply to an email straight away giving out some information. Authenticate the source. Was it the CFO? Did the CEO send it to you? Just maybe do a phone call, phone the bank. Things like that. And obviously email safety. Simple things. Don't forward chain letters. Make sure, as we talked about before, encrypt your emails, and never send social security numbers. Have a system in place where if by accident you send a social security number as part of an MVR, your driver's records, to somebody, to your agent, make sure that it's encrypted, or make sure that it sends it back saying this has a social security number and it maybe black out the first 6 digits, that type of thing. And so for me, when I'm talking to an agent, to a Crane agent, I'm saying, I'm trying to understand, the insured's risk. Have they had a data event before? What do they have in place? How much are they collecting? How much are they storing? What type of data is it? Is it just, easy stuff? Is it just driver's records? Or is it health data? Are we taking credit card information, social security numbers? And how are they kind of protecting it? Is it outsourced? Do they use an outside vendor? Are things encrypted? Have they had a penetration test? Things like that. So, typically you'll get like a 16-page app. You're gonna be like, oh, I don't want to fill this in. But that just gives us a snapshot of what you're doing with your data, and how we want to kind of look at that, and because maybe we go, well, we'd love to cover them, but we think there's a few areas here that they need to tighten up on, and that's where we can become, and your agent become like a trusted advisor, saying, hey, if you looked at these reasons and these things to to protect your data and stuff. So don't be afraid of the 16-page app. Just fill it in, and because at the end of the day we can give some good feedback. So yeah, more, how long are you maintaining records? Are you destroying them after 7 years? What's your document retention? Those types of things. Do you want to go on a little bit longer?
Your app is 16 pages?
I know.
Wow. More of this, some of this is an overlap to Ryan. Again, what Adam and I review as underwriters. Let you read that. Again, this is just typical underwriting. Okay. More policies, procedures, record retention. And then some common insurance considerations. Ryan's or Adam's slide, couple slides back, talked about the gaps between the CGL, first-party coverages, your business interruption, network restoration, forensics, call center, credit monitoring, PR. All of that is a first-party cost. Information risk coverage, what to look for, general consideration, third-party liability. Starting to see, as I said, more and more clients of yours requiring cyber coverage. More exposures that may not be addressed by a typical CGL policy. Okay. This probably is more real in your world, right, Adam, with the property?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening these days is that your typical bot policy is trying to push off a lot of these non-property, non-GL type exposures. They weren't really designed to cover loss to non-tangible property. So you're going to get those covered on cyber forms, on cyber policy. So don't think that your GL policy, which typically is really there just to cover property damage and bodily injury, slips and falls, things like that. We're now pushing off the cyber type exposures, the personal and information risk stuff onto the cyber policy. So don't think that your bot policy will necessarily cover some of those things. They're going to be pushed off, and that's why you'll see vendors requiring that you have maybe $2 million in cyber limits, in tech E&O limits. That's why, because they know it's being pushed off the typical BOP, and they want to make sure that you're covered when you do business with them. So this is, kind of what network security liability covers. Inability to access or rely on insured's network or data, damage due to a disruption or infection of others, transmission of a virus. This is what these cyber policies are going to be covering. We kept it pretty simple. I mean, obviously these policies are very long and detailed, but this is what you're looking to cover in the first place. So privacy injury. So what does that really mean? This is more kind of to do with what does that data actually hold? So, how dangerous is this data? So we want to make sure that, that there's privacy injury coverage there. Very rarely, when credit card information gets stolen, it's very rare that the consumer, the person who actually has that credit card number, sues. That actually never happens. And that there's no payments ever go out to a consumer because, one, their bank's going to cover it, the credit card company's going to cover it. But what really happens is that the state says you have to notify them, you have to make them whole, you have to maybe Visa's maybe going to have you come back and pay them back for making them whole. So this is what the privacy injury coverage does, and it covers basically liability for all these things that could happen. So if dumpsters, so if you throw documents into a dumpster, we're going to cover that type of thing. We're not going to want you to put stuff in dumpsters, but it is going to cover that. It's going to cover rogue employees, as we said, any unauthorized use or disclosure. So as we said, PCI fines and penalties, it's going to cover that type of thing. That's why I say, you're PCI compliant today, but are you next week, next month, next year? So always be looking at that. And so here's like the regulatory proceeding coverage. So this is going to be if you get fined where you've broken the law, you didn't intentionally do it, but the law may be broken. So the state may come back to you and say we're going to give you a penalty because you did not kind of break up your data into by firewalls in various places. You kept it all in one place and it was vulnerable. So therefore we think you're liable for that. And so yeah, privacy expense, privacy event expense. So this is probably the best coverage of all the cyber coverages. It's going to cover things for credit and identity monitoring costs. It's going to cover public relations expense. You have to hire a PR company to put a advert in the paper saying, hey, we had a breach, everything's fine, don't worry about it, that type of thing. We're going to pay for you hire some new employees just to manage this. We're going to cover some kind of business income related losses. We're going to set up a call center for you guys for people who have to call in and say, was my data breached, that type of thing. So I would say this is one of the more crucial lines of coverage, the privacy event expense. And we've covered this a little bit, the extortion demand, where, anonymous or some, unethical hacker has come in and said, we have all your data. I think the biggest one recently was the Ashley Madison one, which is very sensitive data. Whoever took that can use that and extort people. So we do have that coverage. It doesn't come up that much, but it's definitely there. They're going to ask for small amounts of money because nobody's going to give 10 million bucks out, that type of thing. They're going to ask for 25,000 and we'll give you your stuff back. But so there is a policy line for that.